Hi, I'm Kyle Martin, and I would like to welcome you to my capstone presentation on the Hershey Foods Company. I will specifically be talking about the issue of sustainability and resilience of the supply chain as it relates to the sourcing of essential raw materials. Hershey Foods is recognized globally as a leader in the production of chocolate and confections. With the production comes a task of ensuring a resilient and sustainable supply chain, especially as it relates to the raw materials of cocoa, sugar, dairy, palm oil, and peanuts. The success of the company depends on the ethical sourcing, environmental sustainability, and effective management of geopolitical risks. The Hershey Company was founded by Milton Hershey in 1894 and is the largest manufacturer of chocolate in North America. In addition to North America, Hershey also conducts operations in South America, Asia, and parts of Europe. The Hershey brand is synonymous with the Hershey Milk Chocolate Bar, Reese's Peanut Butter Cup, Kit Kat, and the iconic Hershey Kisses. The supply chain of Hershey reaches 80 countries and interacts with over 5,000 suppliers. The raw materials of cocoa, sugar, dairy, palm oil, and peanuts play an important role in the production process. Each of these ingredients presents challenges related to sustainability, ethics, and supply stability. Hershey's mission statement is to bring goodness to the world through delicious snacks and to create a future full of smiles. And their vision is to be an innovative snacking powerhouse. Both of these statements reflect Hershey's core competency of customer satisfaction, innovative ideas, and sustainability. While other companies are similar in their social responsibility efforts and connection with consumers, it is the corporate culture of Hershey that sets them apart from their competitors. At the epicenter of their corporate culture are the employees, and as Vice President Chris Scalia maintains, when people thrive, so does the business. Hershey's biggest competitor is Mars, maker of M&Ms, Twix, Snickers, and Milky Way. Over the years, both of these companies have alternated as number one and number two in the industry. Other competitors to a lesser degree include Mondelez, maker of Cadbury and Toblerone, Nestle, their largest competitor by revenue, the Ferrero Group, maker of Nutella and Ferrero Rocher, and to a lesser degree, Lindt, a more premium chocolate brand that has a strong presence during the holidays and major retail seasons. Developing a resilient and sustainable supply chain has become a major strategic priority for Hershey Foods in response to escalating global challenges, geopolitical instability, and evolving consumer demands. Continued engagement in sustainability practices such as sound farming techniques, reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, deforestation, reductions in packaging waste, and promotion of fair labor standards are central to maintaining corporate transparency and ensuring a competitive advantage. The growing threat of climate change, which directly impacts the availability and quality of cocoa and sugar, is a major driving force for sustainability. Unpredictable weather patterns and deterioration of soil threaten cocoa crops in prime sourcing regions of West Africa, where over 60% of the world's cocoa is produced. Regulatory pressures have also forced companies to disclose environmental, social, and governance practices to reduce their carbon footprint throughout the supply chain. Furthermore, as mentioned, labor abuse has placed pressure on the food industry to make changes in practices as they relate to labor, especially as it relates to child labor. These forces are prompting the supply chain to prioritize sustainability and resilience for long-term success. Hershey is well positioned to adapt to the ever-changing dynamics of the industry. With their commitment to the brand, sustainability initiatives, and supply chain resilience, they can remain at the top of a highly competitive landscape. They have invested in traceability technologies and other systems to monitor the integrity of their supply chain that can aid in combating child labor, farming insufficiencies, and other issues related to raw material sourcing. As mentioned previously, the raw materials impacted by the supply chain are cocoa, sugar, dairy, palm oil, and peanuts. Cocoa, sugar, and palm oil are the materials most impacted by child labor and human rights violations, especially as it relates to the sourcing of cocoa in West Africa. Hershey has taken steps to ensure responsible sourcing by conducting audits and doing their own due diligence to comply with human rights standards. Additionally, deforestation has also been identified as a major issue affecting these materials. Water consumption and the use of land practices are areas of concern, especially in the regions of Malaysia and Indonesia, where palm oil is sourced. Hershey Foods has invested over $500 million to support sustainable land and farming practices. Dairy sourcing has been mostly impacted by animal welfare issues and greenhouse gas emissions, while peanut sourcing is subject to drought, disease, and other environmental conditions. With these materials, Hershey has partnered with the National Dairy Farm program that sets standards for animal care and environmental responsibility, and has also engaged with agricultural institutions to improve crop resilience as it relates to peanuts. The Hershey Foods Company faces increasing pressure from stakeholders regarding environmental and ethical practices related to resilience and sustainability of its agricultural supply chain. A SWOT analysis has been applied to identify internal strengths and weaknesses, alongside the opportunities and threats that influence Hershey's ability to maintain a sustainable and resilient supply chain. The strengths were identified as Hershey's engagement in ethical sourcing programs and strong supplier relationships. Weaknesses identified were the geographic concentration of the cocoa supply where it is subject to deforestation, child labor, and climate change, limited transparency of secondary materials such as dairy and sugar, and the high carbon footprint as it relates to dairy and sugar processing. Opportunities for Hershey lie in the advancements in agricultural technology, consumer demand for ethical sourcing, and strategic diversification of sourcing regions, while the threats consisted of climate change, resource scarcity, and human rights violations. While the SWOT analysis was helpful in identifying strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, a VRIO analysis can be helpful in studying the resources that are valuable, rare, inimitable, and organized to capture value. In Hershey's case, the Cocoa for Good initiative, for example, is valuable due to its contribution to supply chain transparency and stakeholder trust. It is rare among large-scale confectionery producers, and while other firms may attempt to emulate such programs, the depth of Hershey's partnerships makes this resource inimitable. Importantly, Hershey is organized to utilize its capital systems to support its sustainability goals, as evidenced by investments in traceability, farmer training, and risk monitoring. So with analyzing both external, macro, and industry factors using Pastel and Porter's 5 forces, these two frameworks offer valuable insights into the industry-specific factors that influence organizational performance and decision-making. While Pastel assesses the broader business environment, Porter's 5 forces provides an analysis of industry competitiveness. When used together, these tools enable us to better understand the external forces impacting Hershey's strategic outlook and help identify the areas of vulnerability and growth potential in a very complex market. So with the Pastel framework, political factors include Hershey's engagement in trade agreements, agricultural subsidies, and food safety regulations. In addition, political instability in cocoa-producing regions pose supply chain risks. And furthermore, compliance with food labeling standards are essential in maintaining market access and avoiding reputational damage. Next, economic factors include inflation, currency fluctuations, and consumer spending, that directly impact Hershey's performance. Rising commodity prices for sugar, cocoa, and dairy increase production costs. And finally, exchange rate fluctuations can affect profit margins and pricing strategies, especially in international markets. In regard to the social factors, the trend toward healthy eating and more ethically sourced products will dictate Hershey's strategic direction as it pertains to health and wellness initiatives. Environmental factors consist of environmental concerns across the food industry regarding climate change, resource scarcity, and packaging waste. Hershey faces growing pressure to reduce its environmental footprint through sustainable sourcing, energy-efficient operations, and recyclable packaging. And lastly, legal factors encompass food safety regulations, advertising laws, and labor standards. Compliance with FDA regulations, international food labeling requirements, and antitrust laws is critical to maintaining operational legitimacy. Porter's 5 forces analysis. Here, this analysis reveals the structural forces that shape its strategic challenges and opportunities. First, we'll look at industry rival. Due to the competitive rivalry with companies such as Mars, it is high. Market saturation and high brand loyalty increase the pressure to innovate and invest heavily in marketing. Next is the threat of new entrants, which was determined to be moderate to low. Startups, especially those emphasizing more ethically and healthy sourced products, have gained traction but have not really impacted Hershey's strong brand. Third is the threat of substitutes. This can be seen as moderate due to Hershey's reliance on globally produced products that are often vulnerable to climate change and sociopolitical disruptions in those supplier regions. These factors can threaten the company's market performance and financial performance. Next is the bargaining power of suppliers. The bargaining power of suppliers is relatively low given Hershey's scale and global procurement capabilities. By establishing long-term contracts and diversifying its supplier base, they can counteract this bargaining power. Last is the bargaining power of buyers. The buyers, such as retailers and consumers, have moderate power. Retailers like Walmart and Target hold significant influence due to scale, shelf control, space, and product placement, while the end consumer has access to many alternatives. However, it is the brand reputation and consumer loyalty that have reduced the impact of this force to a degree. The Hershey Company has undertaken a variety of strategic initiatives aimed at strengthening its competitive position, improving operational efficiency, and advancing sustainable growth in an evolving global food industry. Hershey's Shared Goodness Program and Cocoa for Good programs address responsible sourcing, community involvement, sustainability, and farmer incomes. Additionally, the use of technology has enabled Hershey to use data-driven technology to respond to market changes. And lastly, Hershey has committed to developing a workforce centered around diversity, equity, and inclusion. These proactive and forward-thinking approaches are necessary in navigating a complex food industry, and although there will always be challenges, Hershey will be in a good position to respond. Inactions present challenges and risks for the future of Hershey Foods. Failing to address environmental, social, and governance issues will impact not only operational performance, but also long-term competitiveness, stakeholder trust, and regulatory compliance. Cocoa sourcing is a major concern. Failing to invest in corrective actions to support this crop could result in decreased purchases by the consumer and loss of brand equity. Most importantly, is the subject of child labor, especially in the areas of West Africa. Failing to respond could result in reputational damage and jeopardize stakeholder confidence. On top of these issues, stricter laws relating to due diligence, carbon reporting, and sustainable sourcing have been introduced. It is the responsibility of Hershey to respond to complying with these new regulations. A lack of response in any of these areas could mean inventory shortages, increased lead times, and a compromised ability to meet demand, which could affect revenue and profitability. The Hershey Company must take aggressive steps to future-proof its supply chain. By investing in supplier partnerships, digital technology, climate adaptations, and performance accountability, Hershey can become more innovative and sustainable. Hershey's long-term financial performance is closely tied to the stability and ethical sourcing of key agricultural inputs such as cocoa, sugar, dairy, palm oil, and peanuts. Over the past 5 years, price volatility in these materials driven by climate change, supply chain disruptions, and regulatory pressures has contributed to gross margin pressure and rising operational risks. So, the income statement here. These results show an overall strong performance by Hershey Foods. While net sales showed a slight increase, the company saw significant improvements in profitability and operational efficiency. In addition, gross margin improved, which could indicate that Hershey was able to reduce the cost of goods sold or improve pricing power. Overall, Hershey was successful in converting sales into profit, which enhances financial health and shareholder value. With the balance sheet summary, the changes between periods indicate a mix of improved liquidity, inventory investment, and a debt reduction, with a slight decrease in shareholder equity. Overall, the changes suggest a more liquid and less leveraged position, which means they have more immediate resources on hand to cover expenses without having to borrow or sell assets. Although net income declined moderately, Hershey's high operating cash flow drove cash and cash equivalents higher. This data indicates that Hershey's financial position is stable and resilient. Overall, the company maintains solid profitability and healthy cash flow, reinforcing its ability to fund operations, invest in growth, and return value to shareholders. For a more in-depth look at the financial documents, you can find that after the conclusion. Taking all these financial statements into consideration, we can determine that the Hershey Company is financially sound. While earnings are exposed to input volatility in the short term, its investment in sustainable sourcing, supply resilience, and digital transformation promise long-term stability and value creation. According to Michelle Buck, the Hershey Company president and CEO, while historic cocoa prices are expected to limit earnings growth this year, we believe our strong marketing plans, innovation, and brand investments will drive top-line growth and meet consumers' evolving needs. It can be concluded from conducting this analysis that the Hershey Company is highly resilient and adaptable as it pertains to both their supply chain and financial operations. They have made sound investments in ethical sourcing, supplier diversification, and technology to weather global disruptions and reputational risks. From a financial perspective, Hershey has experienced consistent revenue growth and has maintained stability and market competitiveness. The business model of the Hershey Company is strong and forward-moving, which enables them to remain firmly planted in their people-first values-based leadership while also adhering to transparency and profitability standards. Thank you for attending my presentation, and here you can find the income statement, balance sheet, and cash flow summaries, as well as my sources. Thanks.